If you've ever played a Mario Kart game before, the one course that probably sticks out in your mind is Rainbow Road. Its first iteration was in Super Mario Kart back in 1992. It was drastically different from all other courses in the game. There were no walls, very few obstacles, and any false move would send you falling off the track. This course's difficulty became a natural attraction for speedrunners, whose goal it was to race through the track as fast as possible. And throughout the Mario Kart games, all of which feature their own version of Rainbow Road, this course's legacy is still preserved. Let's take a look at how speedrunners have been able to break this course to set world records. Let's see just how good people can get at racing through Rainbow Road. The story begins in 1992. This was the year that introduced the franchise's staple course, Rainbow Road, from Nintendo's Super Mario Kart. The game had two different methods of racing: Grand Prix, where you raced against other drivers, and Time Trials, where you raced against yourself to set the fastest time possible. This video is going to be focused on world records achieved in the Time Trials mode. The goal of Time Trials was to race 5 laps around Rainbow Road as fast as possible. And today, the leaderboard is split up into NTSC and PAL world records. The NTSC version of the game was released in North America and Japan, while the PAL version was released in Europe and most other regions of the world. The main difference between PAL and NTSC is the frame rate. NTSC is 60 frames per second, while PAL is 50 frames per second. This led to the developers changing a lot of the code between the two versions, resulting in race times that are a few seconds faster on the NTSC version. The very early history of who could race around Rainbow Road the fastest is extremely difficult to find. Given the difficulties of accessing the internet in the early to mid-90s, the overall world record was not particularly well kept track of. The earliest agreed upon records on Rainbow Road come from the late 90s and early 2000s, with the NTSC record typically staying a couple seconds ahead of the PAL record. While video proof doesn't exist for many of these runs, we still have a pretty good idea of what these records looked like. They in all likelihood used either Bowser or Donkey Kong Jr. as their racer, since they have the highest top speed on the main road. They probably took full advantage of hopping over corners, a technique used to gain small amounts of time on each lap. One technique that could not be used, however, was boosting. By turning around a sufficiently large section of the track, holding accelerate, and pressing either left or right on the shoulder buttons, the racer gains a small speed boost after completing the turn. However, Rainbow Road doesn't have any turns large enough to build a boost, as you need to be turning for at least 74 frames, or over a second, in order for the boost to be built. So, driving around Rainbow Road simply consisted of cutting turns as tightly as possible and hopping over corners. One of the most dominant runners of the early 2000s was Jamie White, an NTSC player who, in a 10-day span in January 2003, set 9 world records on Rainbow Road. He didn't have any mind-blowing new strategies, he was just extremely good at the game. One of the best players Super Mario Kart had ever seen up to that point. On the PAL side, Sami was the first verifiable record holder, while KVD and Geo traded the record back and forth throughout 2005, before Kart 7 snagged it right back before the new year. Then, in 2006, a revolution was discovered across Super Mario Kart as a whole. The backs of the D-pads on Super Nintendo controllers have a bump that prevents two opposite directions from being pressed at the same time. Kart 7 discovered that by opening the controller and shaving this bump down, it was possible to get boosts much more easily by using a method called the zigzag boost. The player could hop and wiggle from left to right on the controller even while going over a straight section of the course, and begin to build up their boost without turning. This, combined with going over a long enough turn, would mean boosts were now possible frequently throughout Rainbow Road, saving a fraction of a second each time. Now, the idea of modifying a controller to gain an advantage may sound controversial, but this practice was more to standardize play than anything else. Super Nintendo controllers sometimes naturally shave this bump down through heavy use alone, so allowing people to do it themselves just made it fair to everyone. There's still a leaderboard that doesn't allow these types of boosts, the non-NBT leaderboard, but for simplicity's sake we'll be focusing on runs where the boosting is allowed. KVD would end up lowering both the PAL and NTSC records down further using the zigzag boost, farther into the 126 range on PAL and down to a 123 on NTSC. Other competitors would get a hold of these records for periods of time, but KVD's mastery of the zigzag boost helped him continuously regain his title. Japan also has their own leaderboards for the game, and in June 2012, a player known as Marisa posted an NTSC time of 123.51, along with a video for proof. This was more than a quarter of a second ahead of the NTSC record at the time, and the way Marisa did it was by A, just driving really well, and B, by utilizing a technique known as hop boosting. Normally, players build a boost by zigzagging on the straight path before a corner. Since you can't normally build a boost while hopping over a corner, it's sometimes necessary to spend a little extra time on the straight path to build up the boost, causing the hop to be a little bit later and having it be a little bit less than optimal. However, Super Mario Kart has two hopping buttons, L and R. Keep in mind one of these must be pressed the entire time you're building the boost for it to be built properly. You press one of them to hop, and then by switching to the other one the frame after you let go of the original one, the game will allow your boost to keep building. Since you can now continue building your boost while in the air, the zigzag boost build can be stopped slightly sooner, and you can get an optimal hop over the corners. This extremely difficult technique is known as a hop boost, and helped Marisa save a few frames over the course of the run. This record is a bit controversial in the Western world, mostly due to a lack of communication between Marisa and the West. So far, nobody has been able to beat it. The closest any other NTSC player has gotten is a 123.63 by KVD, achieved in January 2018. Even 7 years after his time was achieved, Marisa's record still reigns supreme by over a tenth of a second. So that's the history of Super Mario Kart's Rainbow Road World Records. But a few years after this game, Nintendo released its first sequel. Its legacy is preserved by its hundreds of active time trial players, and it has one of the most broken speedruns out there. This is Mario Kart 64. Mario Kart 64 was the first game in the franchise to be in full 3D. Courses could now go up and down instead of just left and right. Naturally, this meant the developers could do a lot more with Rainbow Road when designing it. The end result, however, was this. This is Rainbow Road. It's the longest course in the entire Mario Kart franchise. In some respects, it's the complete opposite of the Super Mario Kart iteration. Instead of having no walls, there's a rail along both sides of the track all the way through to prevent you from falling off. There's no thwomps ready to crush you, but instead a few chain chomps that roam the track trying to hit you. It's a bizarre course. You're just surrounded by space while driving around a seemingly endless rainbow path. There's no risk of falling off, you just drive as well as you can. However, I mentioned before that Mario Kart 64 was a really broken game. There are large skips on most of the tracks, and as innocent as Rainbow Road may seem, it too can be broken just the same. One of the game's most famous shortcuts is from the very start of Rainbow Road. You jump off the side of the track as it goes downhill, and land far down on the track below. This trick was discovered essentially right as the game came out, and it's impossible to tell who the first person was to pull it off. It cuts out a pretty significant portion of the track, as you can see from the minimap. The best part is, it's really easy to perform. Many could pull out their copy of Mario Kart 64 right now and probably get it on one of their first attempts. After getting this jump, it was up to the player to simply drive around the course as well as possible. This involved doing mini turbos nearly constantly. By hopping and holding R to drift, then wiggling the thumbstick back and forth twice, the player builds up a boost that can then be released to gain some speed. It works quite similarly to boosting in Super Mario Kart, except boost can be built up much faster in Mario Kart 64. Also similarly to Super Mario Kart, the game has both a PAL and an NTSC version, where the PAL version runs at 5/6 the frame rate of the NTSC version. What this means in Mario Kart 64 is that the game overall is slowed down on PAL while the race timer is kept at the same speed, so an identical run will be about 17% slower on PAL. The Mario Kart 64 community actually puts PAL and NTSC runs on the same leaderboard, mathematically converting times between the two versions to tell which runs are faster, although playing on PAL gives a bit of an advantage since you're essentially playing in slow motion. After the shortcut on Rainbow Road was discovered, there began to be two types of runs through the course. Non-shortcut runs, where you drive around the entire thing as normal, and shortcut runs, where you would do as many shortcuts as you could to go as fast as possible. The non-shortcut record, going by the PAL conversion on the leaderboard, is a 6-minute long journey around the course 3 times. The record has only come down by about 10 seconds in the past 20 years, and the only real strategy improvement was the discovery from David Tran at the very start. By triple tapping the A button on the big hill at the start of the course, you'll be able to avoid becoming airborne and will go down it much faster. Other than that, for non-shortcut, all you were really doing was following a path around the course of driving and drifting. Of course, this still took an enormous amount of skill to get just right for 6 full minutes. An Australian runner named Alex Penev set 10 records in a row in non-shortcut in the late 90s, with players such as Sami and MJ trading it back and forth in the mid-2000s. Lately, the non-shortcut side has been dominated by Abney317 and Matthias Rustemeyer. These runners all use either Toad, Yoshi, or Peach, since they're the fastest characters in the game. On the shortcut side, however, the course has evolved a little bit more. For the first couple years, world records were set simply by jumping at the start of each lap, then driving as well as possible around the rest of the course. Each of these jumps saved about a half minute, so the record was down to about 4.5 minutes by 1999. However, that July, a player named Miles successfully executed a new method of the shortcut, the spiral jump. By doing a mini turbo, then jumping as far to the left as possible over the railing, it's possible to just barely make it over to the spiral on the left. This saves another 10 seconds or so over the other jump, but is much, much harder. Michael F. became the first to hit 3 of these in a run in 2004 by using a more consistent but slightly slower method that involved braking before the jump over the rail. The recent history of this record has been pretty amusing. Players Carlo and VAJ both held the record for a few years in the 2000s and 2010s. Then, in early 2015, Abney got the record with a 3:56.36. He got the spiral jump 3 times and drove really well all the way around. It was a time that would stand for nearly 3 years. But in November 2017, a player named Zoran took it from him, a 3:56.15. A 3-year-old record beaten. Well, later that same day, Abney beat him back with a 3:56.07. Zoran wasn't about to let that set him back, so he got back to grinding and, remarkably, a few days later, he beat Abney again, this time with a 3:56.02. It was an incredible feat, firing right back at a guy who had held the record for 3 years straight. A feat that was only overshadowed by the fact that for the second time, Abney beat him right back later the same day. After this, Abney would be beaten by Matthias Rustemeyer in late 2018 for a couple months, but on New Year's Day 2019, he got the record back with a 3:54.87, and that's where the record stands today. Mario Kart 64's Rainbow Road has certainly had a storied history. But now, in 2001, Nintendo released their newest iteration of the track on their new Game Boy Advance. This is Mario Kart Super Circuit. This game has probably received the least attention of all games in the Mario Kart franchise, but as it turns out, it can be broken just as much as any of the others. To prove it, let's take a look at Rainbow Road. The track's similar to Super Mario Kart's version, with no walls anywhere on the track. It seems like all you can do is drive around the course and follow the rules, but that wouldn't be any fun. Rainbow Road is surrounded by bumpers on each side that you can bounce off of. By using a mushroom and going over them, then landing on them to bounce again, you can essentially just bounce around the course. I mean, look at the minimap. It looks like you're just going wherever you want, as if the track is just a suggestion. This concept of using the bumpers was first fully fleshed out by a player known as Yui in early 2002, just months after the game's release. Yoi was able to land on each bumper directly after flying in the air, leading to him bouncing up again. If he instead landed on the road, his speed would be dramatically decreased, so landing on the bumpers was pivotal. Of course, the bumpers themselves are super narrow, so landing exactly on them is no easy task. But Yoi was able to pull off a run of 36.45, flying around the track 3 times. All of this precision is obviously extremely difficult, and involved using a ton of small, undetectable strategies that I'll explain later. The record would come down a couple seconds over the following few years, but in 2005, an incredible time was achieved. A runner known as Mander pulled off a 34.63 in 2005, coming up with a new strategy of skipping the section of boost near the end and instead going more directly towards the goal. This strategy saved about a second across all 3 laps. To give you an idea of how hard this route was to pull off, we can take a look at a tutorial video for this route made by Super Circuit speedrunner Hahe. The player must aim just right for every jump, let go and press A at precise times, and even hold R to drift at certain points. Any slightly missed input means the strategy will fail, and the player must restart. Now, most of these strategies had to be performed regardless of whether Mander's or Yoi's route was used, but Mander's route did add in a tricky section where you had to hold A, aim for a precise part of the road, launch off a bumper when drifting, and then countersteer just before landing. Basically, there was a world of precision that went into this Rainbow Road strategy. Getting all of it was incredibly difficult to pull off, but still definitely possible. Mander's record is a bit controversial in the Western world, mainly because he had used speed hacks in Mario Kart Wii before. What's more, Mander used Toad in his run even though he's slower overall, but he is easier to control. If Mander had used Bowser instead of Toad, his time would have been about 0.3 of a second faster. Regardless, Mander's time caused the rest of the community to strive for absolute perfection. It wasn't until 2010 when a player was finally able to beat him. The runner was known as Boomer, and he beat Mander by 1/10 of a second by playing with Bowser. His time would be tied 5 years later by Hahe, and then beaten by 0.03 of a second by a player known as Shock, which is where the record stands today. This incredibly difficult, yet incredibly bold looking strategy really makes it stand out. Bouncing all over the track definitely is fun, but the execution needed to pull it off just right is super punishing. To this day, only 6 players have been able to get a time under 35 seconds on Rainbow Road, and Shock's record has stood for nearly 2 years. It's estimated that the total time could probably come down by another 0.3 seconds or so based on tool-assisted speedruns. Who's going to be the person to take it under 34.5 seconds? We'll just have to wait and see. It's time to move on to the year 2003. It's the era of the GameCube, and full 3D is back in the Mario Kart franchise. This is Mario Kart Double Dash. Just as with the other games, as soon as Double Dash came out, players around the world began competing for the fastest times on each course. For Rainbow Road, many of these early times don't have surviving videos today. To find the first video, we've got to go to November 2004. There, we see a time of 256.616 by Stefan VD. The first thing to notice for this run is the character and kart choice. Stefan picked the lightweight Koopa Troopas as his characters, and the barrel train as his kart. This is because in Double Dash, lightweight characters get a longer boost from mini turbos, and the barrel train is fast both on and off the road. Double Dash's Rainbow Road features several sharp turns that need to be made just right in order to avoid falling off. Drifting and charging up mini turbos around these corners is done similarly to in Mario Kart 64. Pressing R to drift, then wiggling the thumbstick back and forth. You get a small boost after releasing. Double Dash also has a technique known as R-Tech, discovered by Rafa64 in 2004. By letting go and pressing R during a drift, your kart can turn tighter than what's otherwise normal. This is because the game automatically pulls your kart in the direction of your turn when beginning a drift. By pressing R over and over again and foregoing the mini turbo, you fool the game into thinking you keep starting new drifts, when in reality you're just drifting once. So your kart gets pulled much tighter than it normally would. This helps Stefan get better turns around the hairpin and spiral turns, saving time that added up over 3 laps. Over the following couple of years, the record would come down a couple more seconds partly due to another technique, A-Tech. Releasing the accelerate button between mini-turbos causes the kart to sway less, keeping a straighter path forward. This can be done in strategic straight sections to save fractions of a second. In 2007, Swedish runner Andreas set a new record with a time of 254.689. This run's video doesn't exist today, but his previous record from 2 months before does, and it's what you're seeing on screen right now. But there's something really important about this run. Before Andreas' run, the world record had been verifiably broken 36 times. On the other hand, this run from Andreas stood for over 8 years. But before we get too excited here, it's not entirely because the run was so perfect. It was a great run, but Mario Kart Double Dash didn't have a particularly active time trial scene in the years after Andreas' run. Not many people were trying to set records. Even when people did do time trials, they usually focused their attention on other tracks. But regardless, Andreas' run stood on top for nearly a decade. And then in 2015, Andreas came back to the track he had dominated 8 years before and repeated his performance. On June 9th, he beat his own record by less than 0.03 of a second. A few weeks later, Swedish rival Carlson beat Andreas, and then an American player named Andrew beat him. Andrew is one of the first record holders to play on the 60Hz or 60 frame rate version of the game. Unlike Mario Kart 64, the 50Hz version didn't just slow down the gameplay, it slowed everything down, including the timer. This meant there was no conversion necessary between 60 and 50Hz versions. Nowadays, the 60Hz version of the game is strongly encouraged to play on, since the now popular Grand Prix mode is played on 60Hz for timing reasons. Andrew's record from 2015 stood all the way until May 2019, when Goomba beat it by about 1/10 of a second.
Yes! Yes!
And that's where the world record stands today. To recap, the world record was beaten 36 times in the first 4 years of the game's release. It would then be beaten just 4 times over the next 12 years. This record is extremely solid, but it's possible it could come down another second to the 253 range. So that's all for Mario Kart Double Dash. It's now on to the year 2005, and it's time to go back to the handhelds. This is Mario Kart DS. Probably the most notable mechanic in Mario Kart DS is snaking. Mini-turbos can be built up extremely quickly in this game, by just holding R and rocking left and right twice on the D-pad. Doing this over and over means the player can build up boosts nearly constantly all the way around the track. The result is some incredibly fast driving. Snaking has been a staple of Mario Kart DS time trials for years, and it can be seen in the earliest Rainbow Road records with video evidence. Unfortunately, the normal replay system for Mario Kart DS looks like this. It's like they tried to make it an action movie. It's really hard to tell what strategies are being used and how well the race is being driven. And since DS capture cards were really hard to come by, especially back then, sharing Mario Kart DS replays in the first couple years of the game's release wasn't easy. But in early 2007, an action replay code was developed that let replays be seen from the same perspective that the racer originally saw. Action Replay is a device that you could plug into your system to modify how the game performs, similarly to a Game Genie on the NES. As long as the only code you use is the one to fix the replay system, it's accepted in the Mario Kart DS community. The first couple months of the game's release consisted of racers snaking around Rainbow Road like all the other tracks. But in 2006, a potential shortcut was found. The player would make their way over to the spiral, then get a boost from the zipper and jump, just barely making it to the track ahead. As you can see from a map of the course, this shortcut cut out the need to drive around the rest of the spiral, saving a few seconds. The problem was, if the shortcut was performed, the game wouldn't count the lap upon crossing the finish line. Nobody was quite sure why, but it was theorized it had something to do with the checkpoint system around the track. So for a while, no shortcuts were performed on Rainbow Road. But in late 2006, a runner known as Husky217 found something quite a bit harder than the first shortcut, and this time the lap counted at the end. This was the rail glitch. By using a mushroom or a mini turbo and hopping at just the right angle, the player can leave the surface of the course and land inside the rail of the track's big loop. The player then drives forward a bit and leaps off to the right side, skipping the need to drive all the way around the loop. If done correctly, this saves about 3 seconds, but it's incredibly difficult to line up your jump to perfectly land on top of the rail. Husky was able to get a time of 1:57 using the rail glitch, but then a player known as Hatomugi beat him with a 1:56 a few months later. Hatomugi didn't use the rail glitch, but instead used a trick theorized by Etch a while before, the pipe glitch. By driving forward here to load the next checkpoint region, then turning around and boosting off the track, Lakitu will think you're further ahead than you really are and drop you before the corkscrew section. As you can see by the minimap, after the time it takes to go out of bounds and be picked up by Lakitu, this trick saves about 1 second. However, it's much easier to do than the rail glitch. Over the following several months, the record came down second by second with these two shortcuts. The pipe shortcut was easy enough to do once per each of the 3 laps, but the rail shortcut was only really done once per race due to how difficult it was. The record had come down to a 1:51 by 2009, when a player known as Bjork posted a video of a 1:46 with 3 rail jumps. However, the run was suspected as being a TAS, and the video was later taken down. Today, this run isn't counted as ever having been a world record on MarioKartWorldRecords.com. By 2011, runner MK Dasher managed to get the time down to a 1:47 by doing 3 pipe shortcuts and 2 rail shortcuts. This is where the record stood for about 3 years, until the middle of 2014, when MK Dasher found something big. Remember the old shortcut from 2006 that didn't count the lap? Well, 8 years later, MK Dasher found a way around that. By driving forward a bit more, the game loaded the next checkpoint for the track. This was all the game needed to do to count the lap at the end. So now, MK Dasher could drive a bit farther forward and do this. This shortcut eliminated the need to perform the rail glitch, because you'd already wind up at the end of the loop. It was also significantly easier, and could be realistically performed on each of the 3 laps. That, combined with the pipe shortcut on each lap, meant times faster than ever before. MK Dasher set a record of 1:45 in May 2014, and over the next few years he traded it back and forth with players like Leon and Rupa. The player's kart choice changed over time. Before the new shortcut, the Rob BLS was used because of its slightly higher speed, but after, the Egg 1 was used because of its better handling. Optimization was found by doing the shortcuts quicker than before, and cleaner driving overall. In September 2017, MK Dasher got a 1:38, which is where the record stands today. There's also another side to DS Rainbow Road speedruns, non-shortcut runs. In this category, large shortcuts or shortcuts that involve going out of bounds are not allowed, but corner cuts are still permitted. The current non-shortcut record is a 1:54 by MK Dasher, beating a 1:55 by Rupa that had stood for nearly 6 years. That's all for Mario Kart DS. 3 years after the game came out, Nintendo released the next installment in the franchise. It's one of the series' most iconic games, and it's well known for its unique ultra shortcuts. This is Mario Kart Wii. Mario Kart Wii's Rainbow Road is notorious for being one of the hardest in the franchise. With all of its tight turns and lack of walls, it's incredibly easy to fall off the edge and be sent plummeting. Of course, as with every other iteration of Rainbow Road, some players were able to master it in world record time. New to Mario Kart Wii was an in-game online leaderboard system where the best time trials in the world could be automatically uploaded to. Time trial records could be seen instantaneously this way, and could even be downloaded to race against. So, unlike many of the other games where early times were claimed online by veteran players, even some of the earliest records in Mario Kart Wii have video proof, including a 2:37.380 by Yosuo. His run was essentially just a speedy playthrough of the track, but there's a few important things to pick up on. His character was Funky Kong, the fastest in the game. His vehicle choice was a bike called the Flame Runner. In Mario Kart Wii, there's two main types of vehicles, bikes and karts. Karts have the upside of giving the player a longer boost if they drift longer, but bikes give the player the option to do wheelies during straight sections, where the front wheel lifts up and the bike moves faster. There are also two subtly different types of bikes, outside drifting ones and inside drifting ones. Bikes with outside drift throw the back wheel out more when turning, so it takes longer to line the kart up forward after drifting. Bikes with inside drift are generally regarded as superior, since you can do a wheelie much sooner after drifting. So, for nearly every course in the game, an inside drifting bike is chosen, and one of the best is the Flame Runner. This was very quickly figured out when the game was released, which is why Yasuo was using his bike and character combination. Over the following months, the record would come down due to better driving and a couple of tricks, like using a mushroom or a wheelie to hop over the first part of this S-turn. In late 2009, a player simply known as Cole became the first to get a record with a free-fall hop at the start. By hopping when the track goes slightly up at the start, it's possible to get enough air to completely clear the track below. This saves time because the player is moving forward in the X direction the entire time, as opposed to going down the hill where their speed is mostly going in the Y direction. This trick would further be evolved by using a kart, all of which have outside drift. By drifting and hopping over the edge, the kart will continue to rotate to the left. When the vehicle hits the road, hopping causes the game to push it away and give it speed. This speed is enough to go over the zipper at an angle and cut the corner of the track. Since a kart with outside drift is better on Rainbow Road than a bike with outside drift, this makes Rainbow Road the only record in the game to be set with a kart. Over the following several years, the record would come down by a fraction of a second at a time, mainly just from optimizing the driving around the course. Some of the most notable record holders were Japanese runners KK and Runio, who set 7 world records on Rainbow Road in 2011, and Katie, who got the first time of 2:24 in February 2016. His time stood all the way until January 2019, when a player simply known as Bob beat it by 0.04 of a second. There may not be many athletes left named Bob, but there's at least one who's a Rainbow Road champion. But the crazy part is, the playing field will completely change if anybody's able to pull off the ultra shortcut. Because of Mario Kart Wii's strange checkpoint system and a few other mechanics, many tracks have large shortcuts known as ultra shortcuts. Rainbow Road's ultra shortcut was discovered in a tool-assisted speedrun by Esteloy62 in early 2016. The player must go forward in front of the railing at the start, then turn back and hop along the small space between the railing and the edge of the track. Then, the player uses a mushroom and does a spin drift, drifting to the right but holding the stick back to the left, then hopping off the edge of the track, using a mushroom in the air, before finally landing on the track below. This trick requires an incredible amount of precision to pull off. The spin drift must be done at exactly the right angle and location, because the player must make it far enough back in order to fool the game's checkpoint system to have the lap count, and the player must hit the track at the right angle to have a chance at making it to the track. What's more, there are invisible out-of-bound patches across the gap between the track that must be avoided. If they're hit, the game recognizes the player as being out of bounds, and Lakitu picks them up. Esteloy's tool-assisted speedrun, or TAS, was essentially just a demonstration of what was possible. It used tools like slowdowns and re-records to create a theoretical speedrun. Today, more than 3 years after the trick's discovery, nobody's been able to execute this trick in a real-time speedrun of the track. King Alex has probably come the closest. He estimates that he's done more than 10,000 attempts to get the trick. Some of his recent attempts have gotten good spin drifts, but hit the out-of-bounds planes that end the run. Whether King Alex or some other player is able to pull off this trick, it'll definitely be regarded as one of the finest runs in all of Mario Kart Wii. That's all for this game. Now we're going back to the handhelds again, where we find a very unique iteration of Rainbow Road. This is Mario Kart 7. Mario Kart 7's version of Rainbow Road is the first in the series to not have 3 laps of the same track. Instead, it's one long course that's divided into 3 sections that count as laps. Rainbow Road is widely regarded as one of Mario Kart 7's finest tracks, and as a result, it's had a pretty deep history for speedrunning. Unfortunately, Mario Kart 7's replay system is similar to Mario Kart DS's. You have the option to view it in the action movie perspective, or from a first-person perspective. There exist methods of getting around it, like using a 3DS capture card or just recording the run live with a camera, but these methods were used pretty infrequently, so most replays are from the first person. The first verifiable record was a 142 by Walter in December 2011. The re-addition of coins to the series made for a new challenge. The player starts with 0 coins, and can pick up to 10 of them at a time. Each additional coin adds a little bit to your speed, so the strategy around each turn wasn't simply to go as fast and as optimally as possible. There was now the addition of trying to pick up as many coins as early as possible. Mario Kart 7 also introduced gliding to the tracks, where the player could slowly glide down to the ground after getting airtime. Walter used this to his advantage to perform a small shortcut on the second segment of the track, where he glided down to a lower path farther ahead. He also cut this corner at the very end of section 3 to end the course. As with the other games, the first record wouldn't last long. The record time came down by about 5.5 seconds by late 2012. Some of the most prominent record holders at the time were Dako, Nasi, and Naiko. These 3 guys broke the record a combined 25 times, and they employed a number of new strategies to their advantage. For example, Nasi figured out the fastest method of going over the wavy section in section 1. Players normally just pressed R over and over to stunt repeatedly and gain speed boosts, but Nasi strategically hopped back and forth across the middle. Because of the way waves were formed, it was possible to immediately stunt quickly on each side this way. Better methods of gliding were used. By gliding quickly down and then up, the kart overall moves faster through the air. Players had to figure out just how low they could go without being out of bounds, then zoom back up to get to the track. By December 2012, a player known as Monar would get the record. What then began was an incredible streak of dominance. As he found minor new strategies and improved his skills at racing, Monar broke the record 16 times in a row through early 2014. He used stuff like wall boosting. When the player hits into certain walls in Mario Kart 7, it pushes them back at a higher speed than it was driven into. Combined with the right angle, this can be used at the railing around the corner just after the start of section 2. After Monar's last record in March 2014, he moved on to play Mario Kart 8, but his legacy in Mario Kart 7's Rainbow Road was firmly established. He had taken the track to a new level of optimization, and it seemed like hardly anybody had what it took to knock him off the top. But there were a couple of players who had a chance: Gogoku 7 and Diogo. These players each had drastically different experiences with the game, but they were both legitimate contenders. Diogo was a seasoned veteran of the game. He had achieved world records in a handful of tracks, and Rainbow Road was just the next course he had his eyes on. Gogoku, on the other hand, was a Rainbow Road specialist. Virtually all of his efforts in speedrunning Mario Kart 7 were focused on Rainbow Road. These guys had gotten their times close to Monar's record, before Gogoku broke through on June 23, 2014. His time beat Monar's by just 12 milliseconds. And just 6 hours after Gogoku announced his time, Diogo announced that he too had broken Monar's record, with a time sandwiched right in between Monar's and Gogoku's. However, between these two runners, only Gogoku would continue the quest to bring Rainbow Road's record lower. Diogo moved on to playing Mario Kart 8, while Gogoku poured everything he had into Rainbow Road. He eventually realized that Rainbow Road had a magic number, 135, a time on the outer limits of what could be realistically done. His record was a 136.261. Was it possible to take the quarter of a second off to get it to 135? Over the following half-decade, Gogoku would embark on a journey to find out. $135.996. By the skin of his teeth, Gogoku had gotten a 135. Nearly 5 years after his first record, Gogoku's journey was complete. He's achieved the last 11 records in a row on Rainbow Road, and he's estimated the time could come down by only another 0.1 to 0.2 seconds. It's probable that Gogoku will be beaten one day, but his achievements on the track are simply remarkable. That's all for Mario Kart 7. After decades of journeys through Rainbow Road records, it's time for the last one. This is Mario Kart 8. Mario Kart 8's Rainbow Road actually has 3 different categories of world records. The standard game has regular time trials, but Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, an enhanced port of the game for the Switch, has both 150cc and 200cc time trials. Each of these 3 categories has their own progression of world records, but just to keep things simple, we're going to stick to the original Mario Kart 8 version. As for the course itself, it's quite similar to Mario Kart Wii's Rainbow Road. Part of the track has no walls on either side, and the 3 laps fly by as the player is constantly thrown new obstacles to overcome. Very early records from when the game came out in May 2014 showed how fast-paced the course was. Most of these times stood for just a few hours each, but some of the most dominant players were Naiko and Kiki. As the dust settled, however, a number of minor yet crucial racing techniques were developed. Probably the most famous one of these is fire hopping. After getting a speed boost, whether it be from a mini turbo, a mushroom, or a zipper, the player can hop a few times to preserve the speed for longer. This is because for karts and outward drifting bikes, speed is lost more slowly in the air rather than on the ground. So by maximizing time in the air, the speed gained from a boost will last slightly longer. In order to further extend the speed of a boost, the player can also perform what's known as demon sliding. It looks quite similar to fire hopping, and typically is performed immediately after. By subtly doing small, quick drifts over and over, speed is maintained more so than from just driving forward. Since fire hopping only works right after a boost, demon sliding is useful to continue preserving speed from the boost. The easiest way to tell demon sliding from fire hopping is smoke from the tires. If there's smoke, then the player is demon sliding. Other techniques include brake drifting and soft drifting. Brake drifting involves tapping the brake button repeatedly during a drift to cut corners tighter, similar to R-Tech and Double Dash. This is used on Rainbow Road during the spiral turns that require the player to stay toward the center to go as fast as possible. Soft drifting involves angling the control stick up at a 45-degree angle during a drift. This causes the mini turbo to be charged faster, at the cost of a less sharp drift. Rainbow Road's records slowly dropped over the course of 2014, largely due to these strategies being used more and more frequently. But Mario Kart 8 as a whole had something bigger going on. As time had passed, the community had adopted a goal: get every single record in the game below 2 minutes. Most Mario Kart 8 records happen to be about 2 minutes long by nature, with a few of them exceeding 2 minutes by a couple of seconds. By July 2014, just 1 month after the game came out, only 6 courses remained with a world record above 2 minutes. And naturally, as time went on, players got better at demon sliding, soft drifting, all of these minor little strategies that added up. And one by one, each of these records slipped to below 2 minutes. By the time 2015 came, just 2 courses remained. But after Ray achieved a 159 on DK Jungle that January, that left 1 course with a record above 2 minutes. Rainbow Road, with a time of 2 minutes and 98 hundredths of a second by Diogo, who had previously battled Gogoku for Mario Kart 7's Rainbow Road record. And so, the quest for sub 2 began. Other competitors like Danny took the record from him early on, but by March 2015, Diogo was setting world record after world record. He was refining his driving and adding in as many hops and slides as he could. One strategy developed by Japanese player Light was fire hopping instead of sliding before this trick near the end of the lap. Normally, fire hopping during a downward sloped surface like this is ineffective, but in May it was discovered that by angling the control stick 45 degrees, fire hopping was much faster. He also took advantage of a trick called cannon glider. By hopping right before a glider pad to just touch the end of it, the glider comes out faster than normal, saving a small amount of time. Then, later that month, he had a chance. He had a solid first lap, and after his second one, he was just barely on pace for a sub 2. As he entered lap 3, the hundreds of hours he had put into optimizing this course were coming to fruition. Saying this was a high-pressure situation was an understatement. To quote Diogo directly, "I heard my heart more than the actual music of the game in the third lap." But as he drove around lap 3, Diogo was finishing the job started by dozens of his peers. 31 courses had accomplished their journey to sub 2. Now it was Rainbow Road's turn. As he crossed the finish line, Diogo may not have been aware of what he had just done. While on pace for his ultimate run, Diogo had just driven the fastest third lap he had ever driven before. The final time was 1:59.903. With less than a tenth of a second to spare, every track in Mario Kart 8 was completed under 2 minutes. Now, that was more than 4 years ago. Since then, the record has come down by a few tenths of a second. Players like Ishak and Danny played a major role in this, with Danny being the current world record holder. But just like all the other Rainbow Roads, the current record doesn't tell the full story. The journey of how players got there shows the dedication, patience, and perseverance involved in setting these times. This has been the history of Rainbow Road World Records. Thanks for watching. Hey, I just wanted to let you all know about an upcoming Mike Tyson's Punch-Out speedrunning tournament I'm going to be hosting. It'll feature some of the top players in the world, and it'll be taking place throughout the next couple of months. You can watch it at twitch.tv/TKO tournament. I hope to see you there.